So welcome to HOP, our first seminar for the series Herpetology Opportunities for Professionals. So if you're not familiar with PARC, PARC is a network of folks who are largely volunteers dedicated to the conservation of amphibians and reptiles and the habitats they are found in. And if you're not familiar with PARC, please check out the website, parcplace.org. And one of PARC's core values is inclusivity and collaboration. And so that's the space in which the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Team, the DEITT, works. So if you're a person who's interested in working towards a more kind of representative and equitable future in conservation, and if you're passionate about amphibians and reptiles, then consider not only joining PARC, but then also joining the DEITT. And I'll share this slide again towards the end of the seminar in case folks want to grab that link. You can also contact us through that email there. And I do want to give a quick shout out to the other folks that helped to coordinate HOP. So in no particular order, Stacy Ambergy, Marilyn Sobel, Michelle Christman, and Grover Brown, as well as other individuals that are part of the DEITT who've been giving some great input. Before I hand it over to Dr. Youngquist, I wanted to give a quick overview of kind of what this format is like. So we're planning on around 40 to 45 minutes of a seminar followed by a moderated question and answer session. So this is a Zoom webinar. You can at any point drop a question via the Q&A function on Zoom. You should be able to see maybe that Q&A option towards the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the seminar, myself and Grover Brown will help to read out and moderate those questions. And again, the recording will be hosted on PARC's YouTube. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our inaugural speaker, Dr. Melissa Youngquist. And let me stop sharing. And I think, Melissa, you should be able to share screen.
All right. I'll apologize in advance, everybody. I am on the tail end of a cold. And so if I have to like shut off for a second, it's because I'm just coughing up my lung. And it says I cannot share yet.
All right, let me give you that power. All right, give it a go now.
All right, good. Okay, thanks all. Just need to, okay. Everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so yeah, thanks for inviting me, Jen, to give this talk. And so I've called this One Woman's Journey in Amphibian Conservation because I think we've all had our own journeys to and through and with doing research with amphibians and working towards the conservation goals. And so I'm going to start a little bit about like where I am right now. And I am employed at Shedd Aquarium. And so people often ask, how do you occupy your days? And if I say that, popping up, oh man. So I work at Shedd Aquarium, people envision penguins and beluga whales and large charismatic fishes, which is not quite what I do. And if I say I work with amphibians at Shedd, being in an aquarium, they automatically think about the exotic animals that we have, right? Our tropical amphibians, which is also not quite right. And I say I'm a biologist at Shedd, they assume marine biology, because we do have a very large marine research program. But that's also not what I do. And so at Shedd, I like to say that I'm a researcher and I study how the local habitat restoration helps amphibians and other wetland habitats. And so Shedd Aquarium, I feel, is a pretty unique place to live and to work. being it's a nonprofit public aquarium with an emphasis on conservation. And so the mission of SHED is to spark compassion, curiosity, and conservation for the aquatic animal world. And this means that conservation is a main objective runs throughout all of the departments and divisions at SHED Aquarium. And the two that I work really closely with is conservation research, which is my home department, and the conservation action team, which is kind of on the ground doing restoration work throughout Cook County. And so again, conservation is in our mission. And unlike a lot of other zoos and aquariums where they also work in conservation and conservation is the main theme, we have a whole dedicated research department doing scientific research to affect change for our different expertise. And we have 4 people who focus on the marine sciences, and we have 4 people in our freshwater side of the research department. And so I'm there. My title is research biologist, and I'm in charge of the amphibian habitat restoration program. So I was hired in 2019. I started as a part-time position, which worked out perfectly for me at the time because I was 30 weeks pregnant, and I really wanted to sort of, when I started, have time at home with the child when she was born. And I worked very closely with our action team to study how their restoration efforts affect amphibians. And so the action team is removing buckthorn from around wetlands in Chicago area. And so I came in and I sort of took over a program to survey these wetlands that are being restored to see what the benefits are. And then last year, I was elevated to full-time position. It's partly because my daughter was 1.5 years and we were both ready to move forward independently. She was ready for full-time daycare, and I was ready to go back to a full-time research position. This allowed me to develop a more ambitious research program, although the caveat that I'm still basically a lab of 1. And I'm also teaching the freshwater ecology course through the associated colleges of the Chicago area. And another big component of my job is being sort of an ambassador for wetlands and amphibians. Science communication is a big component, and sharing my work and the importance of our work to sort of the general public, which is many different stakeholders. So I help with internal events that share my work with SHED community so that other people working at SHED know what I'm doing and can share our work further. SHED hosts exclusive member events, and so I'll give presentations there. We have summer camp outings with middle school students, and I'll take those kids out to some of my ponds to look for tadpoles. SHED Academy is our high school program, and so I work with people in our learning department to translate my work into curriculum that can be used in local high schools, and I connect those high schools in person. And there's also lots of community opportunities to talk with reporters, to do print, televised, doc series, and social media engagements. So how did I get here? I feel that we need to start back at the beginning in childhood, where when I was very little, about 3 to 10, I lived in East Africa, mostly in Tanzania. And living there was fantastic being a little child, but unfortunately, mosquitoes loved me. And I learned firsthand that mosquitoes give you malaria. I caught malaria twice while I was there, the only person in my family to do so. Not quite sure what that means, but there you go. And so mosquitoes were just like the bane of my existence. When I was around 5, I learned that frogs eat mosquitoes. And so I was like, oh my goodness, frogs are my heroes. Frogs will do a much better job of protecting me from the mosquitoes than our mosquito nets that go around the bed. And so for one night, my parents indulged me and allowed me to keep a box of toads by my bed to protect me for the night. And it must have worked because I did not get malaria that night. And no toads were harmed in the making of this. They're released the next day, all hunky-dory. And so this really inspired me when I was little. And 30 years later, I'm still going out. I'm catching toads and frogs and learning about them and their role in the ecosystem. And so just thinking about the big picture, right, is that like there are lessons from my experience that I apply now in my life, right? And that's that kids are very smart and they can make these big connections. And so we shouldn't discount our 5-year-olds or really any age group in trying to inspire them towards conservation. and that the childhood experiences can create these lifelong inspirations and help guide what people want to do with their lives. And frogs are important, even kids can understand this. And so as a person in conservation and who's as an ambassador and trying to share this message is trying to help everybody come to this knowledge that frogs are important and worth our effort and time to protect. So moving forward, I went through middle school and high school, and I consider sort of the second beginning of my career to me my undergraduate studies at Pacific Lutheran University in Washington State. And so I was fortunate enough to have 2 summers of undergraduate research experience where I went out with my professor and another student, and we were surveying the rocky intertidal for these trickleback fishes and sea urchins, trying to figure out where they live in the intertidal, are they diseased, what's their abundance, and this was just super exciting for me. And I realized like being outside, looking for things, asking questions was exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And another really exciting part of this research is that we paired it with lab studies. So we did some diet analyses, we ran experiments, we used some very old equipment. And so I really got a sense through my undergraduate research experience of the sort of holistic approach you can take to science by pairing sort of field and lab studies together. Then this really sort of directed my career trajectory going forward. I realized that I did not want to go into chemistry, which is what I originally thought when I went to undergrad. I realized that field biology was the thing, and I wanted to do conservation biology. This was around the time that the Win-Win Ecology book came out on reconciliation ecology and how we can have humans and wildlife live together. And I thought that was a fantastic idea. In undergrad, I also was a tutor and I had some TA jobs, which I really enjoyed, and I thought I want to teach. And so I really thought I should be a professor at a small school where I can do some teaching, or mostly teaching. And then because of my undergraduate research experience, I realized that I wanted to study the applied conservation of amphibians or reptiles, again, getting back to my first love of my childhood, the amphibians. And so that led to my conclusion that I needed to have a PhD. But of course, there are other paths that I considered. I thought about taking time off school, joining the Peace Corps, taking a technician job. But in the end, I felt that I really wanted my PhD. I really wanted to teach. And so why wait? I would just keep on moving forward. Which brings us to what you might consider the beginning of my career, which is a graduate student at Miami University, where I got into research looking specifically at amphibians. And I worked with Dr. Michelle Boone. So my dissertation was on how local and landscape factors affect inurin species distributions in an agricultural landscape, basically asking how these species respond to environmental variables, does that explain their current range dynamics? And I focused on mostly cricket frogs, Acorus manchardi, and also did some work with bullfrogs. And I took a multiple spatial scales approach, which kind of hankers back to undergraduate work, where I used different approaches at different scales to ask different questions. And so I used mesocosms to ask, does competition affect juvenile recruitment? And maybe it does, but it's not a strong effect. I asked, does land cover around a pond affect the recruitment? And found that really for these 2 species, it was algae, right? More food, bigger frogs. I asked, does land cover affect their movement behavior? So I looked at the terrestrial side and tracked juvenile frogs through these edge habitats to see if they liked forest or field or farmland. And found that, yeah, cricket frogs tend to avoid forests. And bullfrogs are general species, as I predicted. And then I went even bigger and asked, does land cover affect cricket frog presence in their gene flow? And so I took a landscape scale approach using population genetics and occupancy modeling and GIS to ask questions about large scale distributions. And so this is where I really grew as a scientist and became a scientist. And it confirmed that I really do love this work. I do love being outside. I love field work. and that I still enjoy teaching. I had the opportunity to be a TA and also to teach an introductory level course as the main instructor. And so I thought, yes, I still want to do this work and I still want to be a professor. I gained a large breadth of research skills and experiences. I learned how to learn new techniques and analyses quickly. I had to teach myself a lot of new skills. I could adapt to these changing situations, and I left understanding a little bit about a lot of different things. And really importantly is that you gain a lot of soft skills going through grad school. You learn how to, acquire funds, how to communicate with students, with professors, with public, with grantees. I'm a project leader and supervisor. I worked with undergraduate students and had to manage my own project. I just want to acknowledge that, career trajectories are not independent of life happenings. And so throughout this, I also got married to my husband, Dr. Inoue. And after grad school, reflecting back, there are things I carried forward. And that one of them is that mental health is very important to your physical health. I developed anxiety at the end of grad school and it affected me physically. And so for everybody who wants to hear this, right, it's important to take care of your mind and your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being. One of the great pieces of advice that I got from my advisor was that having a child is really the only big permanent decision that you're going to make in life, right? You can't really undo having a child. But, getting married, changing jobs, where you live, all that can be changed. And, the message being like, try not to stress too much about all those decisions that seem really big, but in the grand scheme, maybe are not so big. And I also, looking back, wish I had some other know-how. Like I wish that I had more practice negotiating job pay and benefits. This is the skill that we all need to have, but it's not practiced a lot in grad school. I also wish I learned better how to market the skills I'd acquired, like my business acumen, right? To promote and show that I'm a project manager and I am a very good communicator and team leader and supervisor. And I did do that to some extent because I was able to get a postdoc at the University of Minnesota working with the US Forest Service. And so this is beginning my early career. And the project I joined was this very large project with multiple partners studying how emerald ash borer would affect black ash wetlands and the response of communities to the loss of these wetlands in Minnesota. And so you're asking, how might the community in black ash wetlands change with the emerald ash borer invasion? So we had surveys all throughout the North Woods of Minnesota. We had some experimental sites, and trying to figure out sort of across the different diversity of types of wetlands, riverine wetlands and swamps and large flat wetlands and little depressional pools, sort of what's the community there. And I was hired as a postdoc to be the amphibian authority and to figure out the amphibian story at all these sites. And so I had some technicians that worked with me. We went out and we surveyed for frogs for 3 summers. And I worked really closely with Dr. Grindy at the University of Minnesota Research Extension Office, who was doing birds and mammal surveys. And so we're kind of looking at the whole vertebrate story across these sites. And as a theme of my life, I also paired these with some experiments, looking at sort of more ecosystem level stuff. And so there's an experiment that began before I started back in like 2011, 2012, where there are different forestry treatments, clear cuts, and group selection and thinnings to look at how the plant community would respond and the hydrology would respond to emerald ash borer. And so I did some leaf litter decomposition studies, as well as some bioassays using caddisflies. And so at the end of my 3.5 years with my postdoc, I again had a huge growth spurt as a scientist. Right, this was my first time having a very large collaborative project with different organizations and examining the whole community of a wetland. With partners, we looked at birds, mammals, plants, hydrology, and of course, amphibians. My first time really being the authority on a project, like being the PI of my own research. And I expanded the areas of my expertise. So I moved into community ecology. I had more experience with aquatic invertebrates, and I learned a lot more about plants. And I also learned the importance of work-life balance. So while I was in Minnesota doing my postdoc, my husband had a one-year postdoc in Germany and then got a job in Texas. And so balancing a long-distance relationship was a challenge, and it really makes you figure out sort of your priorities and what you want. And during the time I postdoc, there's a lot of searching for jobs. So I was still sort of chasing the faculty dream, the academic dream. I applied to lots of places. I got quite a few interviews, but never got that offer. And that felt a little bit disheartening. But in the end, it was for the best because I now have the job that I never even knew that I wanted. And that is now at Shedd Aquarium, where I'm serving as sort of my early career stage of my PI-ship. And I just want to acknowledge all the interns that I've worked with over the years. Because I'm a lab of one, every spring and summer, I'm able to hire interns to come help me out doing all my surveys. And we always have a grand time finding these critters. And also my work is very closely tied to the action team at Shedd Aquarium. And one of their main projects is to remove invasive species, mostly European buckthorn, from around different wetlands. And so they are the manual labor that removes invasive species for some of the sites that I am surveying. So my work is looking at how restoration of urban wetlands affects these communities. And I kind of have three stages to my research. And the first is my core study that I kind of began in 2019, which I hope to continue throughout my entire career. And so I sort of inherited 6 sites when I started. This is my collaboration with the action team. These are sites that they had begun clearing. And then in 2021, I expanded this to 12 sites. And then this year, because I had become full-time, this is my first sort of full year of full-time employ, I was able to expand my program. I was kind of exploring the rest of Cook County and what I can do. And so I had a collaboration, or I began a collaboration with the Chicago Park District to monitor some wetlands that they are restoring, a couple different hemi-marshes. And throughout my time, I worked very closely with the Forest Preserve District of Cook County to identify sites that they are restoring that need amphibian monitoring. And so I surveyed a bunch of sites that were restored since 2009. And in the future years, I'm hoping to set up an array of loggers across this urbanized landscape to ask more questions about community and climate change and synchrony and their phenologies. So now I just want to talk a little bit about the work I'm doing now. And this is my core study that I started in 2019. I had my first field season in 2020. And so we have this landscape where we're removing buckthorn. We're asking how this removal affects wildlife. And so I have a few different treatments here. I have some sites that the forest preserves are restoring themselves. And so these are kind of a partial restoration status right now that's ongoing. I have a few sites where the action team is doing restoration work. So I have controls where buckthorn is remaining in place, and then a 10-meter control and a 15-meter buckthorn removal, a 10-meter removal and 15-meter removal. So that's a perimeter around a pond. And then we have an Illinois State Nature Preserve right nearby. That's very high quality habitat. It's under active restoration for like the last decade plus. And so here's what these sites kind of look like. This is a control site where buckthorn is just extremely pervasive. Basically all the shrubbery, all that plant you see there, those green leaves, that's all invasive buckthorn. It really crowds out the pond. This is a picture of our 15-meter cut site. And so you can start to see the trees through the forest. In the background, you still have all that buckthorn remaining, but we really open up the canopy here. And this is the Illinois State Nature Preserve, where buckthorn has been completely removed. It's well maintained, and it's a beautiful, beautiful forest here with wetlands and very open canopy. And I'm surveying the whole community, so taking what I learned in the Forest Service with my postdoc, trying to build on that. And so I do some aquatic invertebrate surveys. My amphibian surveys are looking at sort of the calls. So I use audio loggers to record calls. I do visual surveys for egg masses. I look at larval densities. And I've also started using wildlife cameras to look at mammal behavior and how they use these habitats. So after 3 years of surveys, we're starting to get some patterns. So in our control sites, we do have low cover of plants. It's almost all buckthorn sprouts, high canopy cover and light for environment. I'm really only seeing 1 or 2 species of amphibians per pond, and our invertebrates are much lower diversity. In the nature preserve, we have high dense cover of native plant species for our plants, much more open canopy with light, and up to 4 or 6 species of amphibians per pond, and much higher invertebrate diversity. And being in Chicago and doing this work has highlighted a lot of the challenges and opportunities that come with fieldwork. So the core sites were selected before I joined, and they were selected during record wet years. And so I think in 2018, when they were selected, they all looked like fantastic amphibian habitat. When I did pre-surveys in 2019, they also looked really great. I was like, these are fantastic. But then 2020 to 2022, which is all the years I've done official surveys, we've had very dry summers. And 2021 was a severe drought. And so we're kind of in the sense that, well, in these dry years, hydro period is more important than restoration status, which amphibians are using these habitats. And this highlights why we really need like 10 years of data to look at patterns. And last year was a severe drought, and all of my temporary ponds basically dried by the end of May. So I only had 1 permanent pond that I was surveying for most of that summer. But then in July, we had these late summer rains, and it refilled all the ponds, and all our frogs came back, and they bred again. And so we had the second breeding by chorus frogs, the late breeding by toads, and which was just really interesting for me. And we're hoping to explore that a bit more. And looking at data that I'm collecting this spring from my invertebrates, it's very different from my spring invertebrates in 2021. And this might be a signal of drought. And so I'm hoping that I'm going to see a recovery of invertebrates over the next couple of seasons. And finally, starting to detect like the interplay between spring temperature and this urban heat island, which makes it kind of difficult to plan a sampling route so that you can detect all your species before they metamorphose and leave the pond. This is also inspiring some questions. And some of the impacts of my amphibian conservation research. So these are immediate, such as capacity building. So I've been able to train between 1 and 3 interns each year, engaging the public through media opportunities and talking with guests at Shedd Aquarium. Through education, so again, I work with our learning department to create curriculum for high school students, and I also teach a college course. And I work very closely with local collaborators like the Forest Preserves, the Chicago Park District, and land managers there to figure out sort of what information is needed so that they can have the most effective restoration efforts. In the long term, we're hoping that this work will lead to adaptive management and inform the restoration in urban landscapes, as well as inform policy and garner public support for conservation of these wetland communities. And I continue to grow as a scientist at Shedd. And so I've continued to expand the systems that I work in. So I'm now moved into sort of urban ecology, restoration ecology, and employing new techniques. And this applied conservation is really supported by the mission priorities of Shedd. So I really encourage doing this applied conservation that's going to have immediate impacts, as well as by the local partners, the Forest Preserves of Cook County, and Chicago Park District. I've grown as a communicator and an advocate. So part of this advocacy is manifested as me becoming the co-chair of Midwest Park. So I joined Midwest Park in 2021 as a junior co-chair, and took over as senior co-chair this year. And this has allowed me to utilize and grow all of my soft skills, including being a project leader, organizing large activities, delegating tasks, communicating, managing budget. And so I encourage anybody interested in joining one of the parks, joining advisory boards or any task teams. Don't feel overwhelmed like you can't join because you may not be as expert at anyone in amphibian or reptile, but really promote yourself and the soft skills you have in business management, leadership, and networking, because these are the skills that really propel amphibian conservation forward. And in my chatting with high school students, college students, they often ask me, so what kind of career advice do I have for them? And there are a few things I would say. One is focus always on doing your best, right? You can only control what you do. And there are so many external factors that you can't control. So really, focus on what you can do. Second would be to learn how to be okay with rejection, how to take advice. And I say this because as a scientist, writing grants, submitting articles of publication, looking for jobs, you get a lot of no's, but sometimes you do get that yes. And that leads to the third point is, taking risks and advocating for yourself, because the answer might be yes. I mean, people aren't going to be mind readers. They're not going to know what you want or what to offer you. And so if you want to go from part-time to full-time, if you want to do remote so you can live with your husband part of the year, right, you need to ask. And sometimes you get that. And finally, that it's okay to change. It's okay to change your job, where you live, what you do. And just importantly is finding what you want to do is finding out what you don't want to do. And so with that, I will take questions.
Thank you, Melissa. And I'm sorry about your cold. Thank you for sticking with us through it. So yeah, if there are any folks that do have questions, please use that question and answer function and drop them in the chat. And then Grover, you and I can go back and forth. So I'll take this first one. So Andrew asks, what advice would you give to PhDs who are about to start looking for and applying to postdocs?
Yeah, I would say it's like I applied to everything that I thought I was remotely qualified for, including jobs that maybe I had less expertise on. So my postdoc that I got was community ecology and was originally advertised for aquatic invertebrates, which was not my expertise, but I was able to promote my soft skills, right? That I could do field studies and lab studies. I came up with ideas of like what I would contribute to that project, how I would grow the project they already have going on. And I promoted like I could write grants and things like that. And so really focusing on those soft skills, I think elevates you and what you're going to contribute to that project.
Awesome. In the interim, while maybe we wait for another question or two, you had mentioned in kind of your talk that you learned how to kind of get good at learning new skills or learning new programs. Do you have kind of any tips for how to build that ability?
No, because I was forced into it, right? It's like my advisor was like, you want to do landscape stuff? Good, go learn how to do it. And so it just took a lot of hard work, right? Just time to commit yourself to sitting down and working through it. And then finding people to help you, right? Like finding people who have the knowledge so that when you have questions, they can show you the way. But it just takes time. Yeah.
All right, we have another question in the chat. This comes from the UK. So Maria is an undergrad in biology and wanting to do herpetology research in the future. She says options in universities there are limited, so she's looking to come to the US for her master's. What's the best way to find herpetology research opportunities for masters or even research assistant positions?
Yeah, so you need to find a professor who will take you on. And so when I was undergrad, I basically cold emailed like 30 people. And I said, hi, this is what I want to do. Here's like my CV. Let's chat. And then I heard back from like 5 of those people, and I applied to 2 of them, and I took one offer. I'm sure other people have gone through different routes, like the people post jobs, like different listservs who have funding. And so I think either you can apply directly to an open position, or just find a professor who's doing something really cool and see if they have any students to take on.
Yeah, I teach a careers-oriented class for undergraduates in our ecology and evolution program at my university, and that's some of the same advice. Looking around and finding people doing work you think is interesting, and reaching out, kind of like with a little mini email that's almost like a short cover letter. And like you, Melissa, I think when I was moving from my undergraduate into my graduate degree, I think I emailed at least maybe 15 different labs, 15 different PIs. I heard back from a handful, and then I wound up applying at 2.
And I'll offer some kudos to Maria, because one of the best ways that, for me personally, to figure out what I even wanted to do was to attend seminars like this. And one of the most beneficial classes I had was learning from other people's experiences. And so just being here and asking these questions is already taking those initial steps. So kudos to that.
So we've got a question from Danielle. They ask, do you have any advice for a current PhD student who is interested in pursuing a non-academic position after they graduate?
Yeah, so I would say lean into those soft skills, right? Promote yourself as a project leader, right? Any communication skills or marketing skills or other skills that you're developing, promote those. So like I said at Shed, we, like people in marketing and our PR and learning are all conservation related. And so it's just finding those skills that you already are developing as a graduate student and finding out how to weave them into another profession.
I'm gonna say in the interim, Grover, did you have any questions? Because I feel like I could always interrogate Melissa.
Interrogate away. No, Melissa, I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here this evening.
Yeah, sorry, my cough just got worse as it went on.
That makes sense with talking, totally. Yeah, I think that promoting those kinds of leadership and managerial as well as communication skills is beneficial regardless of if folks are going into academia or not. But I think that's also something that sometimes folks maybe forget about if they haven't had any direct, say, like research experience, but maybe have worked in service or with teams and things like that. You can develop a lot of those useful skills there as well.
All right, listen, we have another question from Michelle. Michelle says that you mentioned you stepped into the Midwest Park leadership role to both further develop your soft skills and as well as to promote your amphibian advocacy work. How did you initially get involved with Midwest Park or Park?
Yeah, so I knew Park existed in grad school because I saw them at meetings. I always thought that looks like a cool organization. And then I went to one meeting, was in Ohio because it was really close to where I was. That was a lot of fun. And then I kind of dropped off the Park radar. I always knew that the Midwest Park was there, but the meetings never meshed up with my schedule and I never really got involved. And I was really nervous to reach out to the leadership and get involved. And so finally, after I got to Shed, I thought, now I'm an authority, right? I'm a capital A researcher. I can join Midwest Park. And so I reached out to the co-chair at the time and said, I'd like to apply to be on the advisory board. And they said, do you want to be co-chair? And I was like, sure. And so I nominated myself to be co-chair and was elected. And so again, just one of those, order or, happy coincidences all kind of lined up to allow me to serve as co-chair.
That was a great question, Michelle. Thank you. And it kind of made me think of another one, Melissa. So you mentioned one of the skills that you didn't really have the chance to develop maybe in grad school was learning how to kind of advocate for yourself in terms of asking for maybe things like raises or promotions, things like that. Is there anything that you found helpful for kind of developing that self-advocacy?
Yeah, so actually I took a STEM, Women in STEM Leadership program through the Stony Brook Alan Alda Center, which is a free like 3-week seminar series or workshop series. And I would encourage all women identifying people to take that. That was very helpful in developing some of those skills.
And so I'm taking, that was like fully online.
That was fully online. Yeah.
Very cool.
Also, I just have to say that I enjoyed your introduction to herpetology so much. I've never heard another introduction to ecology or herpetology like that. So that was a first for me. You just like, oh, I found a turtle or found a frog, and I was, hooked from there on out. Being your personal heroes at such a young age, I love that.
Yeah.
All right, we got another question from Maria. Says that they're also planning on presenting school talks to promote herp awareness and interest. Do you have any advice on getting through to primary and high school students? So I guess those younger demographics.
Yeah, so primary kids are easy. You just got to show them cool facts, right? Tell them that frogs eat by swallow by using their eyeballs, right? They use their eyeballs to swallow. Like I'm instantly hooked. High school students also love that, but they're not going to show it right away, right? So I do engage a lot of high school students, and you have to bring the corny energy, or at least I do, and really promote those fun facts people just don't think about. Yeah.
Awesome. We've got a question from Chuck. So from a different perspective, from someone who hired Melissa, okay, so it's not a question, it's a comment, which is great. We'll take those too. So from a different perspective, from someone who hired Melissa, I can speak to what she did right to transition from part-time to full-time. She's great at her job, troubleshoots problems independently, communicates to others, including supervisors, effectively, takes on a multitude of tasks, and demonstrates her value to all aspects of the organizational mission. Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like if I were in a hiring position, I should hire Melissa.
Already taken.
Yeah, I think something that I now that I'm developing a lab as a PI at St. Cloud State University, I really am appreciating folks who are trying to develop those skills of so either grad students or undergraduates of communicating with me. Because I know at least sometimes it's hard for just me to keep track of everything. So the more communicative people can be, the more useful and helpful that is.
Also wanted to add off of that last question, bringing the nerdy facts, and getting back to kind of Maria's question too. Those nerdy facts are even good at the collegiate level, and you would be surprised how few of these college students know that they use their eyeballs to consume things, and just these facts that we take for granted. So no fact is too small.
I think something else that, and I guess, you know what, I'm going to put this into a question. So working with the folks that you do, Melissa, for things like community engagement and outreach, have you been surprised by maybe the ways you've had to change your thinking to try and reach folks?
I don't know if it's a way of changing my thinking, but it's more creating a message that targets them what they care about. And so when I am talking with like our members, I'm really honing in and focusing on what makes amphibians really cool. Like, why should we care about amphibians? Why are they worth their time? Versus when I'm talking to like land managers, it's more me listening to like what their needs are and what their focus is on, and then trying to hone my message, be like, okay, you really want to know this, let me help with that. And so really kind of a conversation, figuring out like what your audience is looking for.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get at. And you see that too with like educational outreach and engagement type opportunities. Thinking about where your audience is coming from. I remember doing things like summer camps with kids who maybe didn't have a lot of opportunities to experience the outdoors. And so things that maybe at first glance, I would have thought was an experience that everyone had had, like holding a spider, for example, is not an experience that a lot of them had had. And so taking that time to kind of respond to your audience and ask them questions, I found that really helpful for getting them engaged with what we were doing as well.
Yeah, also I found that everybody loves turtles, but not everybody loves frogs. Because
Really?
yeah, when I take the kids out to the ponds, we catch a turtle, they all want to touch the turtle, but not everybody wants to touch a frog. Yeah. So maybe turtles are the best ambassadors.
That's really interesting. And I wonder, I know Grover as a an awesome turtle ecologist and advocate is biased, I'm gonna say. I'm not biased as someone who studies amphibians, but I've also found that in Minnesota with interacting on average with folks is there is a lot of love for turtles, and frogs are cool, but I mean, if you've got a turtle, so
Yeah. I guess along those lines also kind of related is that I had an intern this last summer as a history major, and he came out and joined me for the summer because he's interested in sort of environmental conservation and policy and the history of environmental science. And so getting him just like out in the field was a really good experience for both of us. Like how do you, someone who has like zero experience out, doing field work and very uncomfortable at first, and then them embracing getting muddy, and seeing that growth through the time is like really kind of changing your expectations about and how to guide someone through that experience. Again, meeting people where they're at, I would say, is like always meet someone where they're at.
Yeah. So what I guess what kinds of things stood out to you in helping to guide folks through kind of some of those first field experiences? Because your first time in the field can sometimes be overwhelming.
Yeah. So I tend to have zero expectations, and we go slow. And if someone is feeling comfortable, I'm like, let's take a break, right? You don't have to go in the mud, right? You can, we have this other task that can be done. You can take notes, like I'll get in the mud. And so sometimes it's baby steps and, giving them other like adjacent tasks, like don't tell them the deep end of the pool to swim, right? It's let's wade our toes in first and see how you feel, and then build from there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think kind of some of the experiences you've talked about, though, are a really good example, too, of all of the different types of skill sets and all of the different types of scientists that play a role in conservation, right? So, you're talking about field work, but you're also talking about the kind of modeling work and the computational work that you do, which is equally as relevant. So thinking about maybe the team of folks that are working as kind of part of your conservation team at the shed, can you tell us maybe a little bit about those kind of different kinds of scientists that are involved in conservation through the shed?
Yeah, so we have a good mix of freshwater and marine sciences. And so we're all doing very applied conservation research. We all have our own target organisms. So I'm amphibians and wetlands. And then my husband, so this is another thing Life Shed was so wonderful, is that we both got jobs in the conservation department there, doing freshwater mussels. And so he uses more genetic approaches, population genetics and evolution. And then Dr. Happel is doing urban fishes. So we have our action team setting up like floating islands, restoring the rivers there. And so he's looking at how fish communities respond to rivers. And Dr. Murchie, she looks at migratory fishes all along the Great Lakes, suckers. And so we have a really sort of diverse freshwater team. And we all have like different expertise in terms of like climate science and genetics and community, kind of all interwoven. And so we can all kind of help each other out with specific questions. So like my husband, Dr. Inoue, is like our population genetics person. So if anybody has a genetics question or wants to use genetic tools for identification, like he's there to help. The Karen Murchie is like related to climate change. So if we have climate questions, she's there. Then Austin and I are kind of into communities, and so we've got that covered. And it's kind of the same on the marine side. We're doing a lot of conservation of like queen conch and lobsters, fisheries in the Bahamas. Dr. Knapp has worked in the Bahamas he's on here, so I can't even quote how many years in case he calls me out for being wrong. He spent his career in the Bahamas doing iguanas there. Dr. Cutting is doing corals. And then Dr. Castle is doing sharks. And so again, kind of the whole array of the marine side is also covered. And they all go out together on a research vessel and help each other out doing all their sampling. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
but like,
yeah.
We all are very diverse, but like lots of overlap. And so we are there to like help each other out and collaborate on some things.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I have to admit, I did not know kind of the breadth of involvement in terms of conservation that the shed was working with, aside from maybe the more direct aquarium part. So this has been really interesting, and thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with us and let us know some of these details. So we've got one more question. This is a good one from Nika. Do professors ever get annoyed by cold emails? I'm an undergrad and there are a ton of herpetologists who I wish I could email just to tell them how inspiring their research is, but I'm scared to reach out to people.
So I can't really speak to that. I imagine it's person by person. I don't think anybody would be annoyed by being told that their work is inspiring. But Jen, you are a professor. How do you feel about cold emails?
Cold emails are fine, Nika. And honestly, that's when I was an undergrad and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I read a book called Mean and Lowly Things by Kate Jackson. And she was a herpetologist and I thought her work was super inspiring. And so I emailed her just to tell her that and to ask, like, how do I become a herpetologist? And she told me some of the same things that we've talked about here. So yeah, cold emails, I don't think, we're all kind of a little nerdy. So I don't think that any of us mind talking about the nerdy things that we love. And Grover is also a professor at Jacksonville State University. All right.
That's me.
What do you think, Grover?
I'm the same way. I would love some cold emails. So if you just want to send me one, I'll come on. No, I mean, I remember emailing professors, and there is that kind of that anxiety that comes with sending them emails, but I always got really kind responses. So we're people. We're just regular people. So
I would say if there's someone who doesn't like cold emails, they're just not going to respond. And don't take it personally, right? That's just people get busy.
Yeah, and that's a reason to, like we've mentioned before, when folks are thinking about continuing either with grad school or maybe exploring internships and things, to reach out to multiple places, not necessarily thinking you're going to apply to all those places, but just so that you kind of increase your odds at finding something that really fits your interests and your goals.
all right, do we have time for one more question, Chen? We have a question from Holden, who is currently doing their undergrad in biology and that would really love to study pit vipers in Southeast Asia. Do you have any advice for how I could study animals that would be in a different country?
I can only speak to my husband's experience because he got a postdoc in Germany. And so he basically did the same thing that we do in the States. He reached out to faculty in Germany and said, I want to do this research with you and let's look for funding together. And so I think you just find the people who are doing research in Southeast Asia and you see how to join their lab.
And because I have a similar experience, when I was in my senior year too, I also reached out to some folks doing work in Southeast Asia with Southeast Asian turtles. And so if you can, I reached out to a network that I developed during my undergrad, and I found a job and I worked in Vietnam for a year for an NGO. So it's entirely possible. There are opportunities out there. You just gotta keep emailing around.
Awesome. Okay, folks. Again, thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Melissa, and Dr. Youngquist, as well. I'm going to put this slide up again in case folks want to think about PARC and or the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Team. Oh, also, let's go back to it. There we go. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us with questions. And our goal is to host at least one more of these seminars over the next kind of academic year. And we'll share the link again soon. So thank you, folks. And have a great evening or morning, depending on where you are.